Why the Trump-Putin meeting was cancelled, hidden motives, global reactions, and what happens next. What happened? Trump publicly floated a meeting with Putin, suggesting it could take place in Budapest within 2 weeks or so. The US White House then stated that in fact, there are no plans for Trump to meet Putin in the immediate future. The Kremlin likewise said no date had been set for a summit, in effect asserting that nothing was really postponed because nothing was firmly scheduled to begin with. Trump publicly said, "I don't want to have a wasted meeting. I don't want to have a waste of time, so we'll see what happens." First, support us by subscribing to the channel for more deep geopolitical insights and real-time analysis from Frontline Macroanalysis TV. Find out together. Why the meeting seems to have been called off, or at least deferred. There are multiple overlapping reasons, some more plausible than others. The key ones include lack of substance, concern about wasted meeting. Trump's own comments suggest he felt the meeting might not yield meaningful progress, and therefore would be a waste of time. In previous talks, for example, the August 2025 Alaska summit between them, the goal, a ceasefire or major breakthrough on the war in Ukraine, was not achieved. If the US side assesses that the meeting has little chance of changing the status quo, the cost, political, diplomatic, might outweigh the benefit. Russia's position appears unchanged, maximalist. According to reports, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told US counterparts that Moscow has not altered its negotiating position compared to what was declared earlier. If Russia isn't willing to shift from its existing demands, for example over territorial issues in Ukraine, then the US might view the meeting as unlikely to yield a deal. Diplomatic signaling and timing issues. Scheduling a summit between two major powers amid an active war, Ukraine, is very fraught. Allied concerns, sequencing of negotiations, and coordination with Ukraine and NATO matter. As noted, Ukraine feared being excluded from earlier Trump-Putin talks. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Lavrov had a phone call shortly before the meeting announcement, and the outcome may have shifted planning. Also logistic hub issues. For example, there was mention of flight path issues for Putin, meaning transit through Polish airspace, if Budapest was to host. Allied European apprehension. European leaders are cautious about any deal that could look like legitimizing major Russian territorial gains in Ukraine. The US risked being seen as acting unilaterally without coordinating with allies. The Guardian noted that European allies welcomed the postponement. Trump's proposals, meaning freezing the war along current lines, may conflict with ally positions. The misalignment makes a quick summit harder. Domestic US political messaging considerations. For Trump, a high-profile meeting with Putin has domestic risk, being seen as too friendly with Russia or appearing to reward Russia without extracting concrete concessions. Also, announcing a summit earlier, meaning insisting it would happen in 2 weeks, may have been politically useful, but actual planning requires real progress behind the scenes. The gap between promise and polish may have become apparent. Underlying war dynamics still complex. The war in Ukraine remains ongoing, with shifting front lines, contested gains, heavy casualties. In such an environment, achieving a credible peace negotiation or ceasefire is very difficult. As the reporting notes, previous Trump-Putin meetings did not result in such deals. If Russia believes it still has the military advantage, or is willing to wait, it may prefer prolonging the war rather than quickly negotiating. That reduces its incentive to commit to a summit. What does this imply for future meetings? Yes, it suggests a future meeting could happen, but with significant caveats and conditions. Here are key things to watch. and plausibility criteria. Plausibility of another Trump-Putin meeting. The door is not entirely closed. While the White House said there are no plans in the immediate future, that doesn't mean never. Putin's side, via the Kremlin, also said nothing definitive about cancellation and pointed to preparation being required. Per the comment, "We cannot postpone something that has not been finalized, but it's likely that the timing of any meeting will depend on progress in underlying issues, in particular, movement on Ukraine peace, war resolution, agreement on format, Ukraine's involvement, allied coordination, and logistical, political readiness. Conditions under which a meeting would become more likely. If Russia signals a shift in its negotiating stance, for example, willingness to accept a ceasefire or territorial compromise, that might prompt the US to reinitiate a summit. If the US and its allies reach clearer alignment on what outcome they are seeking, meaning that, what Ukraine must accept, what Russia must give up, and agree on the terms in advance. If there are strong incentives for both sides, Russia, relief from sanctions, security guarantees, U.S. Ukraine, credible path to end war, that make a meeting meaningful rather than cosmetic. If logistical and diplomatic headaches, airspace issues, third-party involvement, are solved. For example, finding a neutral venue, ensuring safe transit, agreeing on format and participants. If domestic political calculations in the US, Russia, and Ukraine converge such that each side views a meeting as beneficial rather than risky. Conversely, what might prevent a future meeting? If Russia continues to hold a maximalist, intransigent position, the US might again conclude a summit would be empty. If Allied coordination falters, or Ukraine is left out and strongly opposes the framework, then a summit might be deemed risky. If the war intensifies or front lines shift unpredictably, making a stable negotiation basis elusive. If domestic opposition, in US, Ukraine, or Europe, to any perceived deal with Russia grows. If logistical or security concerns prove too complex, for example, transit of Putin through certain airspaces, or host venue difficulties. My judgment, what to expect. In the near term, next few weeks to, say, a couple of months, I judge that no major in-person summit between Trump and Putin is highly likely, unless there's a sudden breakthrough, meaning that Russia offers a ceasefire, or a dramatic change in the war dynamics. The current messaging, no plans in immediate future, supports that. Over the medium term, months ahead, I believe a meeting remains possible, especially if both sides see strategic benefit. It may be more likely if it's not just a bilateral one-on-one but part of a larger diplomatic process, including Ukraine, European allies, UN, etc. If the US ups to press for a significant outcome, rather than a symbolic summit, then we might see preparatory meetings, foreign ministers, envoys, first, then a summit. The format may shift. Instead of a location like Budapest, perhaps a more neutral third-party venue, or a more limited format, or maybe the meeting becomes part of a broader multilateral forum. However, if either side perceives the other as not serious intransigent, meaning that Russia holding its line, US requiring too much, then the meeting may be indefinitely deferred. Why this matters? A meeting between Trump and Putin is high-profile and would have large geopolitical implications, especially for the war in Ukraine, for NATO-European relations, for U.S.-Russia relations more generally. If such a meeting happens and results in a deal, it could reshape the battlefield and diplomacy in Eastern Europe. If it happens and fails, or is purely symbolic, it could undermine US credibility or empower Russia. The fact that the US is now publicly signaling caution, no meeting until meaningful progress, suggests an effort to avoid optics of engaging Russia without results. The meeting, or its cancellation, is also a signal to allies. The US is aware of allied concerns and is not simply moving unilaterally. In summary, The planned Trump-Putin summit appears to have been deferred rather than fully cancelled, but the language suggests there are no near-term plans. The main reasons: concerns it would be a waste of time, lack of meaningful progress on Ukraine and Russia's unchanged demands, allied diplomatic complications, and domestic political risk. However, I may add that it could have been the usual Trump throwing tantrum. A future meeting remains possible, but its occurrence depends heavily on underlying shifts: Russia's willingness to engage, U.S. allied alignment, and the war's dynamics. Unless there is a significant change in one or more of those factors, I'd not count on a major summit imminently. But looking out toward next year, it remains on the table. That wraps up today's deep dive on the cancelled Trump-Putin meeting, a reminder that behind every diplomatic move, there's always a web of strategy, power, and timing. As we watch the next steps unfold, remember, global politics doesn't stop, it only shifts. Stay informed, stay critical, and never take the headlines at face value. I'm Remmy, and this is Frontline Macroanalysis TV, where facts meet foresight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next global breakdown. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and see you on the front line together.